This week, we're taking a look at the latest in redistricting news. Redistricting is the redrawing of congressional and state legislative district lines every 10 years. The people in charge of drawing these boundaries vary from state to state. Let's start with Alabama, where Republican Governor Kay Ivey signed new congressional and legislative maps into law last week. The congressional map, dictating boundaries of federal House districts, maintains the GOP's 6-1 hold on the state. The single Democratic seat, District 7, is held by Representative Terry Sewell and is the subject of the latest lawsuit alleging racial gerrymandering. The Republican-drawn map packs the majority of the black population into District 7, resulting in only one minority district. One lawsuit, brought by black voters in and around District 7, reads in part, "Between 2010 and 2020, Alabama's black population grew 6.5%. During the same period, the state's white population fell by 1.7%, meaning majority black Alabamians drove all of Alabama's population growth over the last decade. And yet the state's newly enacted congressional redistricting plan further entrenches the state's white majority by creating only a single majority black district in the state, despite Alabama's black population being sufficiently numerous and geographically compact to support two majority black congressional districts. HB 1 cracks black voters between the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd congressional districts and packs black voters into the 7th congressional district despite, or perhaps because of, the fact that the black population in these districts is sufficiently numerous and geographically compact to form a majority of the voting age population in a 2nd district. Additionally, there is widespread racially polarized voting in Alabama, and when considered against the totality of the circumstances, the enacted plan's failure to create two majority black districts dilutes the black vote, in violation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. GOP candidates in Alabama are also crying foul over the state legislative map's prioritization of incumbent protection. Like other Republican-controlled states, for example Arkansas, Georgia, Mississippi, and South Carolina, Alabama's redistricting guidelines mandate, quote, "contests between incumbents will be avoided whenever possible," end quote. Josh Pendergrass, a former communications director to Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, was eyeing a contest against Representative Will Dismukes for the House District 88 GOP nomination before last week when the maps were first released. He is now drawn out of the district and placed into the adjacent House District 69, which is a Democratic seat occupied by Representative Kelvin Lawrence. Next up, North Carolina, where the General Assembly approved new redistricting maps along party line votes on Thursday. If the courts do not step in, Republicans will gain a significant advantage for the next decade. Democratic Governor Roy Cooper has no veto power over redistricting. The congressional map, reflecting an additional House seat granted during reapportionment, consolidates the GOP's power by securing two additional Republican seats and removing a safe Democratic seat. The result is a 10 Republican, 3 Democratic map with one toss-up seat. Democratic Representative Kathy Manning's 6th district is completely removed from its current position, forcing her to compete in a new safe Republican district. Democratic Representative G.K. Butterfield's current 1st district is redrawn to dilute black voters, thereby reducing it from a district that went for Biden by 9 points to a district that Biden would only win by 2 points. Representative Manning called the new maps, quote, "an extreme partisan gerrymander that splits communities of interest," end quote. Under these maps, Guilford County is split into 3 congressional districts, diluting my constituents' interests and lumping them in with far-flung counties in the Western Mountains, the suburbs of Charlotte, and as far east as Wake County, she said. These maps don't acknowledge that the Triad is a region with shared interests, concerns, and needs. These maps were created for one purpose only: to ensure Republicans win more House seats so that they can recapture control of the U.S. House of Representatives, Manning said in a statement. North Carolina's NAACP filed suit prior to the map's approval, challenging the criteria used by the redistricting committees. From the beginning of this process, the defendant chairs of the Senate Committee on Redistricting and Elections and the House Committee on Redistricting have, despite warnings from citizens and legislators of color, stated their intention to consider neither racial data nor perform any kind of racially polarized voting analysis to understand how district lines would affect minority voting strength and representation. The county clusters designated by the redistricting chairs prescribe districts that will dilute the voting power of Black North Carolinians, and the draft maps already proposed would diminish the ability of voters of color to elect their candidates of choice. No lawsuits have been filed against the state's legislative maps, which also give Republicans a strong advantage. For example, the state Senate's 50 seats would split into 24 safe Republican seats, 17 safe Democratic seats, 5 seats that lean Republican, and 4 seats that lean Democratic. If Republicans win the competitive seats in the House and Senate, they could gain supermajorities to overcome any vetoes from the governor. Moving next to Ohio, where the bipartisan but Republican-controlled Redistricting Commission gave up on creating congressional maps, without considering a single proposal. Their decision grants the overwhelmingly Republican legislature the power to draw congressional districts. The State House and Senate unveiled their versions of Ohio's future congressional districts last week. Both were immediately panned as unconstitutionally gerrymandered to maximize GOP power. The current 12 Republican and 4 Democratic seat map would shift to a 13 Republican and 2 Democratic seat map in a strong Republican election year. Just District 3, part of Cleveland, and District 11, part of Columbus, would be safe Democratic seats. The House-drawn map is particularly skewed, with a 16.7% Republican advantage in a hypothetical 50-50 popular vote split. Even Governor Mike DeWine, a Republican, said there's some work to do on maps that could give the GOP as much as a 13-2 advantage in a state that voted for then-President Donald Trump with 53% of the vote in 2020. It's pretty clear neither one of these maps are going to fly, said DeWine, calling them a starting point. Both maps would draw Democratic Representative Marcy Kaptur, the longest-serving woman in Congress, into a Republican district. Kaptur, in a statement, called the proposed maps a clear violation of fair congressional districts. A legitimate redistricting of Ohio could have easily achieved a balanced result without elongated far-reaching boundaries that break apart metropolitan areas, split Ohio's communities of affinity, defy natural topography, and shatter economic regions, Kaptur said. A map must receive support from 60% of lawmakers and 33% of Democrats to last 10 years. Otherwise, it will only be in effect for 4 years. Unless Governor DeWine vetoes the final plan, which he did not do for the state legislative maps. So far, 3 lawsuits have been filed against the legislative maps. One, brought by the League of Women Voters of Ohio, alleges the state district boundaries violate the Ohio Constitution. Just after midnight on September 16, 2021, with a 5-2 vote along strictly partisan lines, Ohio's Redistricting Commission enacted maps that are intended to, and will, entrench a Republican veto-proof supermajority in both chambers of Ohio's General Assembly for the next 4 years. Over the past decade, Republicans have received between 46.2% and 59.7% of the statewide vote. But the enacted map draws 67% of the House districts and 69% of the Senate districts to favor Republicans. Finally, we're going to look at a map duel in Wisconsin, where the People's Map Commission released its own redistricting maps to compete with the Republican-controlled legislature's proposals. The commission, created last year by Democratic Governor Tony Evers, is nonpartisan and independent. Elected officials, public officials, and lobbyists are banned from membership. Evers promised to veto the Republican-drawn maps, setting up a court battle that will likely decide district boundaries for the next decade. For years, the people of this state have demanded better and fairer maps, Evers said during a press conference in Madison on November 2nd. And for years, the people of the state have been ignored. The gerrymandered maps the Republicans passed a decade ago have enabled members of the legislature to comfortably ignore the will of the people. There is no incentive to compromise. The commission's congressional plan takes the state's current 5 Republican and 3 Democratic delegation and turns it into a likely 4 Republican and 4 Democratic outcome. In contrast, the Republicans' congressional proposal gives Democrats 2 safe seats and Republicans 5 safe seats, with 1 district leaning Republican. The GOP proposal focused on a least change methodology to maintain the core of existing district boundaries, which have been regarded as some of the most gerrymandered maps in the nation and have afforded Republicans strong majorities in both chambers for the last decade. Similarly, the Commission's Senate and General Assembly plans split party control evenly, while Republican-drawn maps increase their party's power. The Commission's General Assembly map, for instance, would create 41 safe Republican seats and 43 safe Democratic seats. The Republicans' map would result in 51 safe Republican seats and 35 safe Democratic seats. American founder Thomas Paine once said, quote, "The right of voting for representation is the primary right by which other rights are protected," end quote. However, today, we don't have much of a choice. The politicians choose their voters, not the other way around. Any attempt to change this status quo will take major effort to succeed. We must educate ourselves and become familiar with the processes and history behind redistricting and gerrymandering. David Daley and Carol Anderson have each written enlightening books on the subject, listed in the description below. We can support organizations fighting for redistricting reform. Fair Vote and League of Women Voters are good places to start, also linked in the description. Most importantly, we must get involved. Each state holds periods of public comment on proposed maps. Visit the National Conference of State Legislatures link in the description to find information on your state's process. Thank you for watching. If this video has been at all helpful or informative, please consider supporting me on Patreon.